Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, I'm convinced we just watched two of the best teams in the country go to battle in Atlanta, Georgia. Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs, they just know how to win football games in that building. Dill, the first thing that to me comes to my mind, we always talk about Georgia and the talent they have on the roster. The culture within the building of this Georgia program is special. And you don't win like Georgia has won the last couple of years without some special culture getting mixed in. You saw that tonight. I think there's a strong argument to be made that Texas, for a large portion of that game, especially in the first half, outplayed Georgia. But when it came down to making plays and when it came down to being a winning football team, we've seen Georgia time and time again in the biggest moments play their best football. To me, the story of this game in the second half, Georgia found that rushing attack, and it is very hard to run on this Texas front seven. With the addition of Gunnar Stockton, and shout out Gunnar Stockton, that dude's an absolute warrior. They were able to get the run game going. The pass catcher started to make some plays in the second half, and it's kind of how you win this football game. Excited to get into some takeaways now. Before we do, and as always, Georgia fans, Texas fans, let it fly in the comment section. Phenomenal football game. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, without further ado, I think we got to start with Georgia. We start with the victors here. Biggest takeaways from this Georgia win.
I mean, I think you're really starting to see that defensive line really dial it up and how dominant they were. But at the end of the day, that development in their cornerback room, I think, is probably the
Yeah.
story of the season because that was such a problem, it felt like, for times during the season. I thought Dalen Everett, like, that was first round level cornerback play from him. Daniel Harris, too. I know he gave up a play or two, but like those were earned plays by Texas. Like those are just really good plays. I thought his coverage was great. So I look at the way those two cornerbacks especially played. Those guys are to me making a difference.
Who probably struggled the most in the back end was Malachi Starks. That's something we're not used to saying about this Georgia defense over the last 3 years. And Malachi Starks is going to be fine. He can't play like an All-American player every single time. And he also came up with some plays, but you also saw maybe some plays that he expects to make on a normal Saturday. Dill, Quinn Ewers, I thought, played really good in the first half. If you're a Texas fan, can you find that for all four quarters in the playoffs? This is going to be a very, very hard Texas team to beat. You said it best. When Texas was pushing the ball down the field and having success, and look, the box score tells us 358 yards. It's hard to throw the football for that many yards against Georgia. I thought a large portion of it was Quinn Ewers playing some really good football. But you look at the Georgia defense, that defensive line was really wrecking some havoc, especially in the second half. That's the game plan for Kirby Smart, Glenn Schumann, the Georgia Bulldogs. If you were to ask them, like, how do you want a game to go on defense? We are going to stop the run and get after the passer. That's what it looked like pretty much all second half for this Georgia defense.
Well, and we talked about like Nazir, Stackhouse, and Brinson. They were a huge problem in the first
100%.
game against Texas. They dominated again. I mean, they're just beating that interior offensive line, a good offensive line for Texas, really relatively consistently. They were both making negative plays. They're rushing the passer better than I think we typically, frankly, see those two rush the passer. Those two, again, had a really dominant game for the second straight game against Texas. In Texas, when they don't run the ball particularly great, you see it does put some pressure on that offense because, again, a lot of it goes to Ewers, and he just doesn't play as well when he has to throw the ball.
Needs to work off some play action. I think that's kind of where it starts for Texas, and they just really couldn't find anything in the run game. I thought Raylan Wilson had a phenomenal football game for Georgia as well. Last thing, well, I think that's kind of all I have on defense. I think the most exciting part if you're a Georgia fan is that's probably the best. I'm right now probably not taking an offensive line over what Texas has. Now, not Kelvin. Kelvin Make's not been out there, certainly a factor, and that's a storyline to monitor in the playoffs. But that's probably the best offensive line you're going to see the rest of the season. And if you see your defense play like that, they can play like that against any team in the country. I think that should give Georgia fans a lot of confidence going into the playoffs. Bye week is going to be huge. Or by game, I guess you'd say, is going to be huge for Georgia, getting some of these guys back healthy. They'll go into the offense. I think you got to start with Gunnar Stockton coming in the second half. Made one bad mistake, which I think we expected to see one or two of those mistakes from a kid that hasn't really played, definitely hasn't played in that kind of football game. But still, outside of that, especially his legs and getting him involved in the run game. And I think his presence of running the football allowed Georgia to get the run game going with a guy like Trevor Etienne as well. To me, that was the story. Georgia could not run the football in the first half, got the run game going in the second half, and I think it's kind of how they won this football game to me.
And he gave them the winning plays. Like, obviously, he didn't come in there necessarily and light it up, but like, again, on big money downs, whether it was with his legs, whether it was with his arm, and also his the wide receivers, I think, just played better football for him. Because in fairness, Carson Beck was getting hosed by that.
Hosed.
He was making some good throws in the first half.
There will be some Georgia, and I saw some Georgia fans on Twitter talking about Carson Beck and should he be starting in the second before the injury even happened. I'm like, look. I mean, Amy Aaron, Smith, Dylan Bell, these footballs are hitting them right in the hands. Carson Beck threw some absolute seeds down the field in that first half, and you just didn't have your wide receivers making plays. That's going to be something Georgia. Look, that's probably the conversation you got to have if you're Georgia. If you want to win a national championship, you're going to have to find some plays from your pass catchers. And I think they should be getting the tight ends more involved. You look at some of the biggest plays in this football game, it came when you were going after your tight ends. Okay, you don't have Brock Bowers, Oscar Delp. Lawson Lucky. Those guys can make plays, and they've been the more reliable pass catchers for this Georgia team all season. I'd probably like to see them get the tight ends more involved, especially
you still need your wideouts to play better. And again, that's kind of going to be a thing because it's been a thing all year, frankly. And Carson Beck, he's shouldered a fair the blame for some of the struggles on this offense. The wide receivers haven't been good enough start to finish. I think you are right. Like, the tight ends playing really well. I thought Delp had a huge game. I thought some moments like that third down, I feel like when you had to, just like run a physical ball over and get that first down, like him making those type of plays, huge. Lawson Lucky, that's just a great catch on the sideline. So those two are playing well, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't change the fact that they're boundary guys.
You feel like if Georgia wins a national championship, those pass catch, because you need that explosive plays. I don't think Georgia had a single pass go for over 20 yards. And yes, might have that had to do with Gunnar Stockton playing the second half, but I do think it, to a certain extent, you need your playmakers on the outside making explosive plays. That's how you're going to routinely win football games. Going to Texas still. They're still a very good football team, and you make no mistake about that. I think there's a strong argument Texas was the better football team here. You just kind of shot yourself in the foot and then didn't capitalize on certain plays, right? The ball hit the ground for Georgia, 3 or 4 times, and it just never wound up in the Texas Longhorns' hands. That certainly was a start. The high red area Nick Saban talked about it at halftime. Like they I think every single drive they had crossed the 50 in the first half, and you're looking at a 6-3 lead, I believe, going into half. Maybe not. I forget if it's 9-3, 6-3, whatever it was. You have to you can't beat a Georgia team not capitalizing when it matters most. And then the penalties, 11 for 94, especially in the first half, and get 8 for 80. This Texas team played really well. I thought Quinn Ewers played very good football in the first half. But if you want to beat a team like Georgia, you don't say you got to play perfect, but you got to play damn near perfect. And Texas, with some of the mistakes and missed field goals, just didn't play perfect.
And they are going to, I think, need to find a way to run the ball against those physical fronts, because I get it. It's probably not going to be the bread and butter of what you do, but 19 for 51 is just probably not good enough for Wise.
No.
And obviously, he was the only one really taking the snaps. I think if you look at Jaden Blue, if you throw him in there, it doesn't really get better. So their inability, frankly, in both games to not run the ball, that's probably something like, again, whether it's getting a little bit more creative, because they're not moving those guys in between the tackles. I do think that's going to be something to look at. Like, when Texas is on and they're running the ball really well, they've been really tough to stop, and they control football games at a really high level. When you bump into these big boys, like, you got to have probably a better answer, frankly.
I feel like the second half kind of lacks some creativity in the run game. And I felt like this was a game where you need to get creative. If you want to run the football successfully on Georgia, you're going to have to get creative.
A little surprised they didn't even go with Manning.
I have that in my notes. You just watched
that play in the overtime looked like a play they probably could have gone to and just manufactured a little bit on the ground to, like, kind of, again, control the game a little bit.
You talk about the negative plays Texas picked up. I think a large portion of it is when you live in 3rd and long and you can't run the football in 1st and 2nd, Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart are going to find ways to create negative plays and impact the quarterback. I was really surprised, especially because a week ago on Friday night, you saw Haynes King really give this Georgia defense some problems with the rushing attack. Arch Mann is that guy. And you saw him one time in the overtime where you ran a successful play. You set yourself up with 2nd and 5. Was surprised you didn't see more Arch Manning in this football game. Thought Matthew Golden played really well. DeAndre Moore played really well. Defense. Dill, the biggest story for me coming out of this game, this Texas secondary is legit. Like, this is what makes them a national championship contenders. Like, they were good in all those spots last year. That secondary, when they bumped up against Washington, really did struggle, especially giving up explosive plays. They continue to just keep caps on passing attacks. I mean, not a play that Georgia ran in the passing game went for over 20 yards. The addition of Andrew Makuba
He's amazing.
can not be understated. And that's kind of how Texas built this roster. Like, hey, we're going to build it through the high school ranks and then put some cherries on top in the transfer portal. That injection of Andrew Makuba, to me, has completely changed what this Texas defense is. You make no mistake about it. This Texas team can win a national championship over the next couple of weeks.
And probably the only disappointing thing was the run defense in the second half. I did think Georgia got to them a little bit. And you knew that was going to be frankly a bit of a question for Texas. Like, did they have enough high level depth? Like, I think they were starting to build it. I think they have solid guys, but again, when you go play Georgia, you need really good guys in a deeper group. I didn't think the depth exactly held up today because Georgia did move the ball pretty effectively.
What I have in my notes for that is, one, it felt like Texas was trying to do a little too much at times, like trying to get upfield and create negative plays, creating some lanes. And two, like, this is the same thing of what we just said for Andrew Makuba. You can say the same thing with Trevor Etienne. Like, Trevor Etienne, I know banged up, came up with some massive individual plays. And you talk about who's going to win this football game. There was a reason the spread was kind of moving around 1-2 points. It's like, whatever team and individual players come up with plays to win games, that's who's going to win. And I thought Trevor Etienne came up with some of those game-changing plays to help Georgia win this football game.
Because when you can grind a team out with I think they had an almost 9-minute drive there in the third quarter. Like, that type of drive, again, we've seen Texas strangle teams out doing that throughout the regular season. Like, that version of Georgia is tough to stop. I thought the offensive line for Georgia played a much better game than we've seen at times this year. They were good. They were creating lanes. And then you're right, just individually, Trevor Etienne running the ball really well, really hard.
Made some plays. He just looks kind of different than any other. Nate Frazier too. Just got on the football. We got to work on the ball security for the young buck. We'll close it out there. Really, really fun game. We're going to see these two teams play again in the college football playoffs. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.